as we get ready to make that trek to Oxford. But let me start with the Billy Napier news. This is something the two of
Yeah.
us have talked about a great deal. Your reaction?
Yeah, great news. I thought last week, that Billy had taken some steps. You can see the Gators are playing with an edge. And I had a chance to ask him about that yesterday. That first bye week they had, what happened and what changed? Coach Spurrier told us there were some things that changed behind the scenes. And Billy said, hey, we needed some time to come up for air. It was a slow start for Florida. There were some high expectations dashed early. Team was able to kind of huddle together, get close, had some really good dialogue, he said, and some really good practices. In fact, I think he said that Wednesday practice in the bye week was the best they'd had. I also think the DJ Lagway, provided a lift. And I think Graham Mertz did a nice job. Don't get me wrong. Mertz is a very competent guy, makes all the right checks and throws, but Lagway brought something extra. And you could just see when Florida played Georgia, the confidence that the Gators were playing with. They were actually winning that game, of course, when Lagway went out. And as it was, took Georgia into the fourth quarter. It was some third string walk on from an Ivy League school, originally from Florida. Really did a nice job, protecting the ball until late. Gators really fighting. I'm going to be tuned in to see what happens at Texas when Billy Napier takes the show there. But it really turned it around. Good news, I think, for him and for Florida. Really like the edge that the Gators are playing with right now.
Of course, as we all know, the big game is in Oxford this weekend for the Dogs. Give us your view of the week at practice, what you've heard, and what's at stake here.
Well, I think you're a bit of a gatekeeper, Paul, if I'm not mistaken. Did you not say this was the biggest game of Lane Kiffin's career?
I did say that, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that says a lot if you're putting that on them, and I agree with you. I mean, listen, Ole Miss went out and spent a lot of money to get these transfers to beef up that front. The results are clear. These guys are averaging 4.5 sacks a game, and they're second in the nation in run defense. I mean, they got some big dogs in that front seven, some NFL types. You could make the argument that Georgia's front seven talent, front seven talent, is right on par with Ole Miss's, or vice versa. Ole Miss's is right there with Georgia's. So it's a line of scrimmage game. I think both these quarterbacks, Carson Beck, coming off a little bit of a struggle in Jacksonville. He's back in his hometown. I think he was pressing a little bit, Paul. I think Beck is going to go in there a little more dialed in, a little more focused. Dart, meanwhile, he's going to remember getting knocked out of last year's game. I mean, Georgia put a hit on him. He could have ran out of bounds. He did. He wanted to be a hero. He might be a little bit wiser this game because Kirby Smart said, we're going to tackle this guy like he's a running back. If that's not a message, I don't know what is. So I think you're going to see the fortitude and the poise of Jackson Dart and Carson Beck tested in a game where I expect both of these guys to get hit.
Griff, help us with the Carson Beck story because the fans this week have been grumbling and growling about him. I'm going to let you answer because it seems like it's over the top, but you're on the beat. You see what happens every day. What can you tell us about Carson Beck?
Well, I mean, perception versus, some reality. I mean, perception is, Carson got this NIL deal in a Lamborghini and you see him on billboards and maybe he's not as focused. And maybe there is a little bit of truth to that. Maybe there is. But what did happen was expectations went up and Carson set himself up for a lot of criticism if things didn't work out. Now, the reality of the situation is Georgia doesn't have a top 10 receiver. They don't have a top 10 tight end. And when I say top 10, I mean in the projected NFL draft as it stands. There's no receiver going in the top 10. There's no no Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey. They don't even have an offensive tackle, much in the projected top 10. You got to go back a long time since you've seen Georgia with tackle play that's, I don't want to say subpar, but not excellent. Now you put on top of that the attrition at the running back position and the attrition at receiver. So you take away arguably their two most talented receivers with small field issues. Now you take away two, maybe three if ETN doesn't play, your top three backs. So you're left with a true freshman running back and a walk-on. So what I'm saying is Carson's supporting cast is not on par with what you've seen from Georgia in the past. His defense isn't on par either. Listen, Stetson Bennett did a great job and had some heroics, but he had one heck of a supporting cast and arguably one of the best defenses in the modern era. Carson has had to put more on his shoulders. Now, that said, I think he's pressed. I think he's made mistakes, but his margin for error isn't as great as we've seen in the past at Georgia. So he's going to have to get dialed in with what he's got. Aaron Smith is a talented 4.2 40 guy. Dom Lovett's a tough kid. He goes over the middle, makes those third down catches. I think Lawson Lucky's a guy that's going to evolve into all SEC tight end. But right now, Beck's supporting cast does not match what Dart has, where their number 3 receiver, by the way, was an all-SEC guy at South Carolina 2 years ago. So different supporting casts in the skill positions for Ole Miss and Georgia when you're measuring these quarterbacks.
As you were talking there, I started to think about all the great players that Georgia just lost at that position, and all the great players Georgia has had. Can you give us some explanation of how they missed at this particular position?
Well, I mean, you saw AD Mitchell. I think Texas bought him. I mean, he transferred to Texas last year. I mean, if AD's at Georgia, I think they win a title. But there has been some attrition at that position through the transfer portal. And then the guys they brought in, Ra Thomas was a guy that was Mississippi State's '1, Mike Leach's last year, and he had an off-field issue, got dismissed. And then Colby Young, a kid from Miami, they went out and got, and they thought he was going to be a great red zone target, 6'4", 40-inch vertical. And all of a sudden now he's got some off-the-field issues, so he's out of there. So you're down 2 guys plus. We talked about Ladd McConkey leaving. Now, the development, Anthony Evans is a guy that was really coming on. Also, their punt returner. He missed last week in a hamstring. I'm not exactly sure what his status is going to be. So you got him out. So you've had some injuries and you've had some attrition. And, this is just kind of what happens all over college football. And you've heard Kirby Smart say it. Nobody's got great depth right now. This is one of the consequences of NIL and free agency, the free agent transfers, the transfer portal is your 2s and 3s don't want to sit around and wait their turn. So they go somewhere else to become 1s. And now you've got to coach up the bottom of the roster. And oftentimes those are true freshmen.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty desperate for the Dogs, although Vegas still has them as a slight favorite in this game.
Well, that tells you everything about Kirby Smart. And I agree, Paul, because not only do they not have a top 10 wide receiver, running back, or offensive tackle, they don't have a top 10 D tackle. They don't have a top 10 corner. I mean, when you look at this Georgia NFL draft class, it's been a minute. I don't want to say it's poor, but it's not as elite as it's been. Kirby's developed more NFL guys over the last 4 years. This year, you're not going to see big numbers. So to your point, there has been a drop-off. I think it's pretty astounding that Georgia sits here 7-1 when you look at the #1 schedule in the nation that they played and you look at the attrition at those key spots. So I think it says a lot about the Georgia culture. Kirby talked about the elasticity of the mental toughness. How long can Georgia keep pressing? They've got one heck of a test. In fact, I will tell you, I think this Ole Miss test is tougher than the Texas test. And the reason I say that is because Texas was in shock and awe. They hadn't played anybody. They weren't ready for real SEC speed and power and strength, and they didn't know what to do in the first half. They were playing from behind. Ole Miss knows 52-17 last year. Those guys remember what happened in Athens. They're going to be ready for the Georgia Bulldogs. You're going to see best on best. I think it's going to be an incredible environment at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, the only stadium in the SEC that Kirby Smart's played in that he does not yet have a win in as a head coach.
All that Saturday afternoon, Mike. We'll see you there. Thank you very much, Mike Griffith, joining us as that